Thank you for coming to our panel on Will Ethereum Make It? A very spicy conversation. It is, yeah, the hot topic nowadays. Yes, so Matt Wright, co-founder of Gaia, a decentralized AI project, and Austin Federa, co-founder of DoubleZero, a blockchain infrastructure project. Now, what you guys do isn't very clear. It's not very clear, I guess, what your guys' role, if any, is in the Ethereum ecosystem and what credentials either of you might have on speaking on this topic. So I thought it would be a good way to start off this conversation just by Matt and Austin. Can you share what, if anything, you have done in the Ethereum ecosystem, interacted with the Ethereum blockchain, understand, how it works, etc. Please speak a little bit on that just to get us started.
Yeah, no, thank you. So yeah, Matt Wright, co-founder and CEO of Gaia. We're building decentralized AI inference. My career started in the hackathon and corporate innovation space. I used to organize hackathons and accelerator programs in a bunch of different countries, and then got into blockchain around 2015. Ethereum was very new around here at the time, but we were doing hackathons on blockchain at the time. And then I was at JP Morgan working on Quorum, which is an official fork of Ethereum. We made Ethereum work for banks and enterprises, fully open source project. And then that project got acquired by Consensus Software, where I was at for 4 years. So I was in the lion's den of Ethereum for 6, 7 years. Well, now almost 10 years, but so a long time. And then with Gaia, we're doing a lot of our verifiable inference on Ethereum. So the way I've always said in the space, I work at Ethereum first, and then I work for Gaia, or back then it was, then I work for Consensus. So it's just a big piece of my heart and a big fanboy of Ethereum.
Awesome. So I'm Austin Federa. We're building DoubleZero, which is a physical fiber infrastructure network for high-performance distributed systems. You can think of it as an alternative communications pathway for validators and other types of services other than the internet, because the internet, surprisingly, is actually pretty slow and pretty poorly built. So I got sort of smart contract pilled by Ethereum back in 2017-18. I was working for a fintech company that was rapidly failing and trying to build a borrow-lend token on Ethereum. Then went to work for Republic and launched Republic Crypto with them before joining Bison Trails, where we worked on a ton of the ETH2 when we called it ETH2, and one-way bridge, which some reason we called a bridge, contract work on the Beacon chain launch back in the day. Then went to work for Solana Foundation, spent the last 4 years there working on a bunch of stuff, including like technology strategy and Firedancer client and a bunch of that work we've done since then before leaving to start the DoubleZero project.
Very cool. And Matt, you kind of mentioned you're fanboy of Ethereum. Austin, just to set the stage, are you bearish or bullish on ETH?
Oh man, that's the whole thing, right? What I'll say is that
Keep it short.
I was I started working on Ethereum originally, and I think the moment of diversion from me from the Ethereum project and the direction it was headed was the dissolution of the ETH2 roadmap. Was the abandoning of sharding and scaling the L1 in favor for pushing everything on to the L2, of sort of not developing any protocol integrated like primary tooling and pushing that all off into external development. Back in 2020, when stuff was starting to happen, you could sort of see the foundation of this starting to happen. And what I kind of saw looking around was like, this is going to be a mess. Like, for some reason, everyone looked around at Cosmos and said, we want that on Ethereum. Where you have like non-canonical bridges, where you have 12 different alternative implementations of the same core technology. And I just felt that like you needed more actual protocol development from core Ethereum to make the thing work over the long term. And so to get to your question, I am not bearish on the potential for Ethereum, but I think with the last 3 years have sort of shown us some of the fundamental problems in the roadmap and the way it's been thought of up until now. But we're doing this conversation at a great time because like we're kind of peak bear vibes, but also like the conversation is changing, and it seems like there's a lot of new voices that are sort of allowed into the space.
Yeah. Do you want to say?
Well, I was gonna say I hear you there. Like I think the key challenges that the ecosystem has right now is, people keep saying, where are the apps? Where's the performance? And Ethereum isn't built for that. Like, Ethereum's not meant to be Solana. It's meant to be this, trust layer in the internet. And I think the L2 narrative, perhaps, I somewhat agree with you, sure, on was that a good choice or a bad choice? But as we've seen kind of L2s play out, there's been positives in the L2 ecosystem. We've seen, that could help Ethereum scale. I've also seen a lot of, let's say, coordination failure in a lot of cases. So I also understand, your perspective in some sense. So I think for Ethereum to win, it is a lot of the success does weigh on L2s. It weighs on their ability to bring a lot of activity back to Ethereum as a trust layer. And so what that requires, like from our world, like from Gaia right now, is if AI inference needs to facilitate the development or the facilitation of censorship-resistant AI, and we need to have validated AI inference on an L2 perhaps, because it's much more efficient to do it that way, then we need Ethereum to be that layer of trust that enables for verifiable, like if you're using an agent on the internet and it's coordinating work across different agents, you need to know that the agent that you're participating with is trusted. And right now we're using Ethereum as an economic layer to validate that trust. We're using EigenLayer for that, but doing that at scale on Ethereum, it's not what Ethereum is trying to do. But L2s, yes, and so it's just hard to put all of our eggs in the basket of an L2 that's not necessarily Ethereum, even though they're saying we are Ethereum. That is the tough part.
Yeah, I mean, you just said you're using non-Ethereum DA, right?
Well, L2s are Ethereum, but yeah, I hear you though.
EigenDA is not Ethereum, right? Like objectively, it's not blobs. Which nothing against EigenLayer, but these are just sort of, so one of the things that happens with like Ethereum projects right now is you talk to someone and they say, oh, I'm building this cool thing on Ethereum. Do you want to check it out? And the number of follow-up questions I have to ask to know if I can actually interact with whatever they've built is huge, because not every wallet supports every L2, and then there's a whole bunch of bridging to get my gas token onto whatever L2 I need to be on to interact with it. Sometimes I need to do another bridge to an L3. If someone says I'm building something on Solana or Aptos or Sui, I say, great, let me check it out. Send me the link, or however you want me to interact with the thing. And it didn't have to be that way. Like, there was a world back in the ETH2 roadmap where you had bridges built into these protocols that were run through the beacon chain, and you had the ability for this stuff to move around very seamlessly in ways that had no additional trust assumptions than operating on that core L1 today. Instead, what we have is like you're picking a camp. Like, am I on the OP stack, or am I on Arbitrum, or am I on something else? And we have like every time you ask people who are building L2s about the interoperability problem, you get very specific solutions by the OP stack folks or the Arbitrum stack folks, or pick your stack, the ZK stack folks. And none of those actually talk to each other in efficient ways, right? And this didn't have to be this way. Like, this was a choice that was made at some point by a bunch of folks, and I think it's a choice that was primarily driven by VC investment. It was not necessarily driven by technology vision. It's sort of like saying, oh, we could have put a ton of different VMs on Ethereum and like let people choose their VM. And like, sure, I guess you could say that's an L2 vision of the future. But if we had these things running on shards, right, the 1,000 shard roadmap is basically 1,000 based rollups. But we're 5 years into this, and it's still very hard to use these things from a user perspective. Now, there's incredible technology that's being built on Ethereum. There's no question about that. But like, the question of will Ethereum make it is not, is it going to have incredibly powerful research and technology about how you can build a whole set of tools to make apps sometimes happen. Like, we barely have good applications on L2s and L3s today. And we can't even agree on what an L2 and what an L3 is. And I guess part of the question is, how much foundational security do you get relative to the trade-offs? And do you truly need that for a distributed AI model? Or do you get enough of that from a little bit less World War III proof systems, but much more usable systems.
Yeah, for like at least for us, speaking just to Gaia. So we really just need a high-speed, low-cost blockchain to do verifiable inference. Now we choose Ethereum and the EVM ecosystem of L2s because of the way that inference does not need financial settlement. Really just needs consensus, and so we're able to kind of leverage all the work that L2s have done and VCs have kind of pushed L2s to do, where we can do verifiable inference on any chain. We're chain agnostic, but we choose EVM as an ecosystem as our primary stop. Really because of the developer community and developer ecosystem, again, speed, throughput, and then cost. If we're going to be building an infrastructure that is going to be utilized quite heavily. But I don't have to answer the question.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of gets back to like architecture is not a moat, right? And especially open source architecture is not a moat. You can run EVM on a huge number of things, including just locally on your computer nowadays, right? And so when we're kind of looking at these things, like the question of is Ethereum going to make it? Like, of course it's going to make it. Now, like Oracle still makes it, right? Oracle had better stock returns over the last 5 years than Amazon or Google, but it's not part of the technology conversation. It's not where the cutting edge stuff is happening from, I mean, how many people in this room can name a single Oracle product, right? And that's not necessarily saying that's the future of Ethereum, but like this is when we have to define what like make it means. And we've gone from this version where you have like key voices in Ethereum saying we don't need to scale the L1. There's no point in scaling the L1. We need to push all of the execution off onto L2s. And then you run into a lot of operational issues with that if you want users to actually use the chain, right? And this is kind of like back to the wallet question of like, so if I want to interact with what you've built, what do it's on Ethereum, but what do I need to do that? There's a long list of resource requirements that get into that. And we know from e-commerce checkout flows to app downloads in the App Store, like we have 20 plus years of data on how hard it is to get people to download an app or to press the checkout button on a website. And that's why like Shopify and Apple spend so much money on like text message verification. We have to type in your address because they know if they ask you to type in the address, conversions fall, right? And so what is like the Ethereum answer to, do we actually want hundreds of millions of people transacting on some definition of Ethereum, or do we not? Because it seems like it hasn't been something that's been taken particularly seriously yet.
Yeah, no.
I mean, not a question. I'd just push back a bit on some of the points that you were sharing, Austin. The sharding roadmap for Ethereum was not abandoned because of VCs. It was abandoned because after years of technical research trying to figure out how to do sharding, how to have these mini blockchains that all process transaction compute at the same time, it turned out that wasn't a design that was very feasible for Ethereum developers to pursue, technically speaking. You do have the near blockchain, though, which is an example of a blockchain that has sharding out in the real world. And you do also see, in a way, Ethereum developers trying to shard Ethereum L1 block space through blobs. So when you were talking about the base roll-up vision, that is very much trying to distribute and trying to have parallel compute happening on different mini blockchains, L2s. And so Ethereum developers are pursuing a different scaling roadmap than the original sharding vision, than Solana, than all these other blockchains. But one of the questions that I foresee, or that I want to get your guys' thoughts on, is when you have a blockchain that can scale as much as Ethereum, that can have very, very low gas cost for their transactions. And it's very clear that all of the gas costs can also be abstracted away. Maybe at a certain point, the end user doesn't pay with ETH, they pay with, say, USDC or some other token, and then whoever is the intermediary can switch that over, and whoever the rollup is, they batch the transactions, post it down to Ethereum. The value accrual there to the native asset of ETH is it doesn't seem like a great value accrual mechanism. So when I think about gas tokens, that concern is not, I mean, ETH is farther into its maturity as a general purpose blockchain, but that's an end vision that every single general purpose blockchain gets to eventually. So the way I frame the conversation of like, will Ethereum make it, is does ETH ever become a top performing crypto asset again? Like, do we ever see ETH rise, like there would be a crazy reversal in like the ETH BTC ratio and like the ETH Seoul ratio? Do we see ETH, reach, higher than its previous all-time high by multiples more? Because I frankly see a vision where Ethereum can succeed as a technology, but perhaps not so much as an asset. And I think this is like, so long as we answer these questions, like this is the end game that every other more nascent general purpose blockchain will end up at the end of the day.
Yeah, not counter, but to follow on to your point here. So ETH as an asset and ETH as a technology, or Ethereum as a technology, are two different things. I totally agree with you. Like, how do both win, or perhaps how do one perhaps moves faster than the other? I think Ethereum, the technology, is one of the most beautiful open source projects we've had in history, comparative to Linux. I don't know if you agree, but I think it's,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's a very well coordinated open source project. Just amazing execution and core contributor ecosystem and EIP ecosystem. Just the developer community itself being the largest still is a tout to say it's an amazing developer platform. And then me working with developers for the past decade with Ethereum folks, it just has like a culture and a soul to it that no other community has. I'm very biased. But then ETH, the asset, depends on, block space being consumed, depends on applications or infrastructures being run on Ethereum. And of course, there's a lot of other kind of, token economic related activities that need to happen to increase perhaps the value of ETH, the asset. But then there's also, enterprise adoption that we have not seen yet. Myself at JP Morgan, I was talking to 200 plus banks that were onboarding to a private version of Ethereum. We actually just added some privacy permissioning features, and they would run it on their own on-prem servers. Good old enterprise blockchain days, if folks were there.
Coming back.
It'll come back, and I'm close to we're a part of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. We're a member, and then we're also close with Etherealize. And both organizations are trying really hard to get enterprises to adopt, Ethereum and blockchains in general. And I think a lot of them are ready to do public Ethereum now that we have a lot more privacy preserving features like ZK and FHE. There's ways that they perhaps could do small, pieces of their operations on a public blockchain. And I think that will drive some crazy adoption that we haven't seen yet. I think the ETF adoption in Bitcoin has been great. There's been cool regulation unraveling in the US, but we haven't actually seen the real power players come to the table yet.
So I want to go back to one of the things that you were talking about around sharding and whether that was viable or not. I think we lived in a world where we let perfect be the enemy of pretty great. And you see this time and time again when you're looking at some of these roadmaps where we've gone from a world where you had a universal world computer that was run on, tens of thousands of independent machines all over the world, to a system now where most users are transacting on a single centralized sequencer that's run by one company that has the ability to censor you and rug you at any moment. And the world's most popular L2 is a stage 0 rollup. And it is totally fair to say, well, if we were actually going to take sharding and we were going to scale that out, we would have had to increase the system requirements of an Ethereum node, right, to do something like that. You would have needed a little bit more bandwidth. You would have needed more compute. But the requirements were basically set in, 10 years ago at this point, 7 years ago at this point, for running one of these machines. You could have picked a cost structure and said, okay, it's always going to cost $50 to buy an Ethereum node. and just scaled hardware as Moore's law and other types of technologies take advantage of it. You could set a cost average for bandwidth around the world too. But like, there's ways this could have been done that would have actually generated revenue. So bridges are a great example. Bridges make money, right? In-app swaps on MetaMask or Phantom or any wallet, they're much higher rates than you see if you go directly through DeFi, and most people just go through them. Most people trade on centralized exchanges that have high trading fees relative to the alternatives. Most people don't go to the advanced mode on Coinbase, right? All of this type of stuff. And so you would have suddenly had a core function of the Ethereum blockchain, which was communication between these shards. And that could have been a core revenue driver in addition to just settlement fees. And so you suddenly start to say, okay, yes, we're going to still have this like core property of the beacon chain, which is like settlement and all these core properties that we love, but we suddenly start to see this playing in the execution space just a little bit. You still have alt VMs running on different shards, but the canonical way that things communicate becomes protocolized and becomes an additional revenue source for that protocol. You also could have looked at this and you know, there's a whole bunch of other ways this could have gone too, but like at the end of the day, I think what we have now is if you add up the market caps of all the L2s and you add that to the Ethereum market cap, Ethereum's still pretty dominant. It's just not in one asset anymore. It's been distributed out. It's sort of like saying, okay, well, like the US dollar is like the sum of all stocks and private credit and all these things issued by the United States. But whenever you move away from execution, you are inherently going to reduce the value accrual. That is just a law of business, right? That the US dollar is less valuable than the US stock market.
Yeah, I mean, a couple points there. So sharding as a technical design for scaling Ethereum, it wasn't something that, as I understand, core developers could do, even if the processing, like the computational requirements and the hardware of nodes were like, I don't know, 10x or anything. I will note that for the merge, the requirements for operating an Ethereum node got a lot harder. It's now 2 nodes and an additional piece of software engine API. So in terms of how Ethereum nodes are getting bulkier over time, that is a fact. Although developers are trying to maximize decentralization as much as possible, as that is a core value of the Ethereum ecosystem. On the other topic, though, of other ways that developers could have scaled, I don't think that comparing the way that Ethereum is scaling, because you could argue that Ethereum has grown its economy, and by choosing the roll-up-centric roadmap has grown the pie so much that all of these businesses are directly tied to the success of Ethereum. They've got, Coinbase, Optimism, Arbitrum, all of the roll-ups directly kind of marketing themselves as Ethereum, but kind of sink or swim, like you're in the same boat, so to speak. And I think to some, that's actually very much an advantage. And to the sense of like, again, going to the base native roll-up vision. But anyways, aside from that, there's many ways in which a blockchain can scale. And I think the real question, though, is like, if you have a very scalable blockchain, like Ethereum or like Solana, is there a future where these blockchains succeed and these tokens, these gas tokens, succeed by like rising in value? Or is the end result that all of these tokens go to zero? Like, because when we say, is Ethereum going to make it, I think we're all in agreement that Ethereum as a technology, as a platform, is going to make it. People are going to build apps on it. It's going to be used in very many ways. And maybe that's what everyone else in the audience, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's like the be-all, end-all of why everyone is here, and that's enough, that Ethereum succeeds as a technology. It's a technology that is used for decades in the future. But it could be that the asset it doesn't make it. It never reaches, again, its all-time high. But if that is the case, I guess like that just spells a lot of doom and gloom for the rest of the crypto industry, which is a lot of gas tokens. So
I disagree on that one.
Get to this.
So what Ethereum did is it offloaded competition. right? Like what you used to have on the Ethereum L1, and there were good parts and bad about this, but there was $3,500 gas during the ApeCoin airdrop because there was competition, right? The minute you switch from an execution environment to a settlement environment, nothing is timely and there's no competition. And so if there's no reason to actually care about when your transaction makes it to the L1, which there isn't if L2s get properly built out, then suddenly you've taken one of the major revenue drivers away. And so I agree that if you have a nested layered ecosystem, the same thing will happen to the L2s when execution moves to the L3s, and the same thing will happen to the L3s when execution moves to the L4s, right? If we kind of are in a Russian nesting doll system of scaling here, anytime you offload execution, you offload competition. And so what you've seen on Solana, just as one example, and you see this on Aptos and Sui and Say sometimes as well, is when there's competition, you have multiple revenue avenues of fee generation, and all of that returns value back to people on the L1. And when you stop having competition, you get into a market structure that either needs protection, right? The New York Stock Exchange has a lot of protection. You have to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars a year to get a space on the trading floor because the cost to trade on that exchange is functionally zero, but it's very heavily gate kept with entry fees, which is how exchanges make money. Or you have like a Binance Coinlist model, Coinbase model, where there's high trading fees. But if all you have, like the US Federal Reserve as a settlement layer is not a profitable enterprise, right? Like it's not like ACH makes the Fed a lot of money. It's actually a loss leader for them. And so this is the reason I think it doesn't have to necessarily be this way. But I agree that if you have to offload execution, that will inherently reduce competition, which is a much more tenuous value accrual relationship.
I don't think that competition is a wonderful way to frame long-term revenue for a blockchain, like a value accrual mechanism, because we've seen Ethereum go through its CryptoKitties boom, its ICO boom, its DeFi. Sure, if you want a blockchain that is has that kind of gas volatility, where you have these spikes in user adoption, but at every point there's like kind of a limit that you reach a threshold in which your blockchain does need to scale beyond that. It's like, do you want basically, like, you could have consistent steady revenue from, say, a bunch of roll-ups that their business model is tied to paying certain amounts of fees for Ethereum, or you could have your revenue model be directly interfacing with users. But at the end of the day, like, you're reaching a threshold. And at some point, the competition goes away. At some point, you've scaled enough that the competition is not there.
So I don't think we've seen that in any technology since like the 60s. Like, home internet connections are still roughly the same as they were before because we use up all of that additional bandwidth now, right? It's not like a computer processor from 15 years ago is totally good and valid and usable and we don't need a new one. Like there's this relationship between you give people more stuff and they'll find new things to do with it. And so there's no endpoint where you've scaled enough for these systems. Even Swift has to increase capacity every year because there's more wire transfers than there ever were before. And you'd think, why are there more wire transfers now? We have stable coins, we have all these better payment systems, but there's more wire transfers now than there were 15 years ago. And so, like, the way to think about this is it's a relationship between how quickly is demand increasing and supply increasing. And if you can keep those things roughly in pace with one another, you get more fees. And this is like the fast cheap chain thesis in a nutshell is it's SaaS as opposed to like contract software that you charge $5 a month to 1 billion people and suddenly you have a really great business model. Or you build software on demand for like government clients, you charge them $1 billion each. They're both ways to build systems. I think what I would critique Ethereum for is it hasn't increased scale, but the fees are still very low. And so if you go back to when Ethereum was sort of at its peak, a lot of that was driven by burn. Ethereum's inflationary again, right? Like if you go and look at the chart, like the burn is not kept up because there's not enough demand on the base layer right now from settlement. And maybe the answer is we need 1,000 rollups that all have lots of execution need. But you start to look at like the adoption of alt DA because it's cheaper. People aren't adopting alt DA because it's better than blob space. Like sometimes you can say there's not enough blob space, right? That can be an argument for something like a mega ETH or something like that. But you could scale blob space too, right? There's when you start to see divergences between demand and supply, people have to look for alternatives. And so you can't keep the same amount of fee pressure or increase the fee pressure, which you need to increase an asset's value, not in the individual unit of fees, right? The individual fees can go down, but the aggregate fees need to be going up. And that's a scale operation question. And so if you're not scaling the base, I don't know what you get to. And maybe there's some great thing none of us have thought of, or none of us have thought of, that like is something people will pay for on the Ethereum L1 to bring value back to it. But that's kind of just the mental model of like how most technologies tend to go.
So I want to be mindful of time. I noticed that our timer is not there, but as a final
It's 8
question,
p.m.
yeah, I was like, maybe we have more than enough time. Yeah, let's do a final round of questions because I think, yeah, it's been a very
Love being in the middle here. It's like great.
yes, sorry about that.
No,
I apologize.
I'm here with both of you.
No, maybe one final question for the both of you. Because, yeah, depending on your view of the scalability of blockchains, depending on your view of value accrual mechanisms for a highly performant blockchain, be it a highly performant blockchain with L2s or a highly performant blockchain that is a monolithic chain, when you look at Ethereum, what is the change? Like, what is the pivot that Ethereum needs, or needs to, like, maybe it's not a pivot, like, what do you think that Ethereum needs for ETH to make it, for Ethereum to become once again a top performing asset on the coin market, or like whatever, like the market charts? Because I will note, like, Ethereum developers are trying to scale. They're trying to double the Ethereum block gas limit. They're also trying to scale the L2s. They're trying out like a lot of different things. Just want to, yeah, I'd love to know what your guys' thoughts are on like the one thing that you think would really make Ethereum rise again.
Yeah, and I'll just give my very, very biased opinion on AI, and I'll let you expand on protocol itself. But in AI, like I think the crazy thing I've been throwing out there that most people probably realize but haven't thought about too much is that we will have more AI agents on the internet than humans on Earth in the next 2 years. And if they are consuming software and they're consuming block space, perhaps they're using all kinds of Ethereum or Web3 protocol intents, anything a wallet can do, an agent can do. You're more likely to have an agent open up a wallet or a multi-sig, or perhaps like stake or do some sort of on-chain activity, versus going to a bank and open up an account and perhaps do some financial services. And so if this is the easiest moat for them to perhaps be activated, I think that will increase demand for a lot of activities on chain. And so I think whatever we end up deciding on the back end, like we need to be ready to perhaps sell software to AIs versus to humans. I think blockchains weren't built for humans, they're built for AIs. So I think, again, very biased, very biased, but I think we're very excited on the supply side of inference, and like we're really focused, and not just us, like anyone doing AI inference in the Web3, like we're looking for trust. We're looking for Ethereum just to be a trusted layer. A lot of the other components are not top of mind, but then as our demand grows for agents, we want to make sure that blockchains are supporting them.
So I think I should start off by saying like Ethereum is incredible, and like I think it's done an incredible job, and like I want it to do better. And I know I'm gonna be very unpopular at the speaker dinner tonight, but like I care about this stuff because I think it matters. Like if XRP flips Ethereum, that's like not good for anyone. Like I want Ethereum to go back to its all-time high and exceed that, because like it is a great driver of like innovation in this industry, and like we need that. There's awesome stuff happening on Solana too, but like Ethereum has like all of this legacy and all these incredibly smart people working on it, and that's why like I care about this problem. And so the first thing I'll say is Ethereum is charging L2s far too little. Coinbase makes over $500 million a year on sequencer fees, and it pays, I think, something around $5 million a year in ETH fees. Like that is a bad ratio. So one option there is charge them more. Maybe that's not the right answer, but build things on the Ethereum L1 that are worth paying for. Not just settlement security, right? True bridging that actually works between all these L2s. Like build these canonical tools that can generate revenue for the L1. Maybe not a huge amount of revenue, but enough that you can say to one of these like L2s, like, hey, look, you're making $500,000 or $500 million a year on sequencer fees in Ether. We need more of that, and we're going to bring you commensurate value. I don't think the security Ethereum provides, it is not sufficiently charging L2s for today. There's a lot of different ways that could be accomplished. The other version is you just massively scale the L1, right? This is like some of Uma's tweets give me a lot of hope. That is one other option here too, is that you start bringing high value execution back to the L1, and you leave the low value execution on the L2. Maybe a bunch of AI work gets pushed off onto L2s, but like, wouldn't it be awesome if Uniswap could run 100 transactions per second on the Ethereum mainnet? That would be super cool, right? They wouldn't have to go build their own chain and do all this other stuff and deploy 12 versions of it across a bunch of L2s and fragment liquidity and spend a bunch of money rebalancing liquidity pools. People are willing, like what like ApeCoin and a bunch of other stuff in like the gas wars showed us is people are willing to pay for the security to execute on the Ethereum L1 if there's reasons to build it. Like a very common question that like there's a whole bunch of work around state proofs that is doing really neat stuff, but it's very hard to take a state lock on the Ethereum L1 today with EVM. It should be doable. You should be able to build a killer app on the Ethereum L1, and then you hit a certain scale and it migrates onto an L2. It migrates onto a based rollup, and then it can have its 100 million user moment, and then maybe it stays there forever, or maybe it comes back when it needs to the L1, and that you have more of ephemeral rollup architecture and less canonical rollup architecture. There's so many ways that like Ethereum could think about how to bring value and revenue back to the L1 that don't diminish the L2 experience. Because at some point, like if we're on this path, you'll have a major L2. They've already given up on blob space, a lot of them. They're going to eventually give up on settlement, and they're going to pull a BNB and become their own L1, and we'll probably have a major L2 in the next 2 years leave Ethereum from a settlement layer. And if we're continuing on this current trajectory, because what we've seen is users don't care, and we can try and make users eat vegetables, but at the end of the day, like they're not going to do it. And so that's kind of my view of this is like, ETH is not cooked. There's like a real great, incredible future here, but like there's got to be just a little more focus on making things on the L1 that are worth L2s paying for.
Yeah. I will note that many of these ideas have been formalized into EIPs, and there is an active governance debate right now on which of these EIPs should be prioritized in the Fusaka upgrade, which is the one right after Pectra. There are EIPs on raising the block gas limit. There are EIPs on raising the base fees for blobs. There are EIPs for improving the smart contract developer experience on Ethereum. So if any of these ideas resonated with you, please do engage in what the Ethereum developers will prioritize in the next major Ethereum upgrade. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you to our wonderful speakers.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much. Thank you.